if we get access to the photos and videos that we know were seized in the raids on Jeffrey Epstein's multiple homes, and they show Trump in compromising positions, I don't see how he could possibly survive that. If he can, America is a much more soulless and immoral place than I want to imagine.
David, first of all, I wanted to ask you, Peter Mandelson, the UK's ambassador to Washington, he's just been sacked by Keir Starmer over new revelations that have emerged about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. We've got about a week to go until the state visit here in the UK. How awkward is this going to make that moment?
Oh, it should make it extraordinarily awkward. Frankly, given what we know, Keir Starmer would be not unreasonable if he were to say, sorry, this meeting is off. He's not going to do that, but it would not be an unreasonable thing to do. Removing an ambassador is a much easier thing to do at a much lower level. And if Trump is ever forced into fulfilling his campaign promise, or more likely the US Congress and litigants get at the records, the estimates from the lawyers representing different groups of the young women who are now in their 30s and 40s are that there were as many as 1,000 girls who were raped. And you can now look online and see the entire Jeffrey Epstein birthday book. And I think the most revealing thing in there is not Donald Trump's letter with his sort of coded language about secrets and enigma, but the pages done like a childlike drawings with crayons or colored pencils, showing a group of very young girls, and then next to it, a panel of what appear to be teenage girls, pubescent girls, and a naked Jeffrey Epstein, whom they're rubbing with body oil all over, and Mar-a-Lago in the background. And secondly, the picture of Jeffrey Epstein with a check over a woman who was sold between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. Not literally sold, but figuratively. All of this points to a really serious scandal that was covered up when Pam Bondi, the U.S. Attorney General, was the Attorney General of Florida, to widespread among very super wealthy men, utterly outrageous conduct. And the one thing I'd point out about Jeffrey Epstein that shouldn't be an issue to get, or if Jeffrey Epstein was really a Wall Street genius, there's no evidence I've seen of that, but let's assume for a moment that he was. Well, then there should be trading records for stocks that were bought and sold, partnerships, securities, various kinds. And there should be statements, monthly or quarterly, sent to his investors. So let's see those records. You can even blank out the numbers, perhaps. But I think we will find out that, as with the Madoff Ponzi scheme, there are no records. And the difference between the Madoff Ponzi scheme, the biggest known Ponzi scheme by far in the history of the world, and Jeffrey Epstein is, I think, the evidence points to Jeffrey Epstein running an extortion racket. And imagine for a moment that you are a male billionaire, that you are shown a photo of you in a compromising position with a 13-year-old girl, which means you're going to go to prison if this comes out. How much would you pay to ensure your freedom? Hundreds of millions of dollars, perhaps $1 billion or $2 billion of your billions. And that's the real story here. And once we get to that, then the rest of this should come out. So a very awkward meeting if this meeting goes off. And I hope that Starmer, at a minimum, puts a little bit of public distance between himself and Donald Trump, because if we do get the records, he's going to have egg all over his face.
You think that Keir Starmer shouldn't go ahead with the state visit because of the Epstein situation?
Well, that's a little further than I would go. I was saying it was entirely reasonable for him to cancel it. I mean, there are big issues here that need to be dealt with, particularly the security of Europe, as we see that what I've been saying on your show and others for years is accurate, that Ukraine is just the next step in the Putin plan to conquer Eastern Europe and put back together under the Kremlin's boot the old Soviet Union. not as a communist apparatchik operation, but as a dictatorship run by Putin and whoever succeeds him. The militarized drones that were sent over Poland, a NATO member, are a clear sign that Putin is intent on occupying these other countries. And I have relatives by the marriage of one of my 8 children in Eastern Europe, and they'll all tell you if Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, it's just a matter of time before the Russian tanks roll in.
And I will ask you about Poland in a second. One more question on Peter Mandelson, which is, I mean, you know Donald Trump very well, and you've been reporting on him for a really long time. What sort of person? I appreciate you might not know the exact names of people here in the UK that might be up for the job, but what sort of person should be put in Washington? Because there's kind of an idea that Peter Mandelson was quite a risky person to put in that role. But then on the other hand, Donald Trump doesn't like kind of typical politicians. And if you just go in with a safe diplomat, that actually might not be much better.
Morgan, that's actually one of the best questions anybody's asked me in months. And I do TV as many as 20 times a week. Donald Trump has to be understood as who he is, not who he presents himself as. He is the 3rd generation head of a 4-generation white collar crime family. They don't break legs and kill people. They would never do that. But they cheat with contracts, broken promises, compromising law enforcement officials or others to get what they want. And the Trumps are not the only family like this. They're just the most well-known family. And Trump believes he is America's dictator, and he is, at the moment, de facto the country's dictator. He just hasn't fully consolidated his power. He's eliminated many sources of accountability. So in sending an ambassador to the United States, you need to have someone who, first and foremost, is not gullible. They're not going to be taken in by Donald's terrific talents as a con artist. I mean, I've exposed con artists throughout most of my career, which dates to 1966. And gotten some of them sent to prison. And Donald is in a league by himself as a con artist. So you need to have someone who is a flint-eyed and has a clear moral core, and at the same time who can dance with the devil. And that's a rare set of skills. It augurs for career diplomats who have worked in very difficult posts and successfully maintained relationships with dictators or wannabe dictators, not a politician, not someone who was picked because of their wealth. And of course, in the UK as well as the US, the costs of things like ambassadorial parties at the Washington embassy are not borne by the government. I think that's a terrible policy error. It distorts everything else. Taxpayers should pay for what needs to be paid for. And that includes the costs of representing your country to another. You absolutely need to have an ambassador here. During Trump's first administration, he didn't appoint ambassadors to a number of places, and all sorts of huge business deals were made at which the U.S. had either no one at the table or no one with authority at the table. And, ambassadors' jobs are, they are intelligence gathering at their core. You notice that the president's wife doesn't show up. You notice that somebody who you were told was very important in the administration suddenly isn't there or is there. And what does this mean? And you go back and provide this raw intelligence to the analysts who will figure out what that means. So dealing with Donald Trump requires a sophisticated, morally aware, but able to dance with the devil personality. And the world isn't full of people like that.
Looking at Epstein a little bit more broadly, I mean, he's been obviously very disruptive for UK politics today, but especially for Trump himself, with the alleged note to Epstein for his birthday being released. And I should say that the White House, they've called the document a fake. They've said the signature in the letter isn't his. But nevertheless, I mean, this story is not going away at any time. I mean, to what extent is Epstein just weighing down Trump as he's trying to kind of get things done in the new term for Congress?
He survived Stormy Daniels, E. Jean Carroll. He has survived 30,000 lies documented in his first term, lies and grossly misleading statements. He survived being a serial tax cheat. Um, he survived being very close friends and doing extraordinary favors for one of the biggest cocaine traffickers in America before he was president. And as president, he's pardoned all sorts of sexual predators, drug traffickers, money launderers, and other serious criminals while saying, I'm for law and order. And remember, Donald Trump said on the Howard Stern radio show in America once that his cutoff age was 12. It's his own words. 12 is too young. Wow. The age of consent in the U.S. nowhere includes 13-year-olds in the last 50 years. This is the biggest thing Trump has to figure out how to get out of the news. And there's a large dedicated group of people who are doing everything they can to keep finding new ways to present the story. That's the key. You've got to have somewhere to go with the story. That's one of the reasons I recommend focusing on the finances as an aspect of this. There's just a lot there. You can put it out at a piece at a time. And by the way, the New York Times, where I was a reporter for many years and won my Pulitzer Prize, did a very good piece analyzing Donald Trump's signature. It's Donald Trump's signature. It's consistent. Donald says, I've never done any drawings. He's got lots of drawings out there that he's done. And this piece that's in question in the book, by the way, is reasonably artistic. I mean, Donald is not a man without talents. And much as I find it perverse, I've always admired his skill as a con artist.
We've also seen MAGA stalwarts like Marjorie Taylor Greene leading the fight on this, saying she's going to stand with survivors. We're sort of starting to see some rumblings of division within the MAGA base. Is that kind of is she the first domino to fall here?
This issue is the only issue as of now that has really seriously divided the MAGA base. There's some disagreement about his borrowing money to give tax cuts to billionaires, but that's really minor. This is clearly divisive. And Trump was the one who raised the issue. He promised when he got to the White House, all these documents would be released. And so, this is you hoist on your own petard. As more comes out, I think you'll see a few more people who are in the MAGA base join Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, even Lauren Boebert, who boasted about being a grandmother when she was 32 years old and was caught acting inappropriately in a movie theater with her boyfriend on film or on tape. She has also expressed some revulsion at this. The lobby to support sex with 13-year-old girls by grown men is pretty damn small. And so this is going to continue to vex Trump. It's going to get in the way. And all he can do is say it's a hoax. Clearly, it's not a hoax. We have lots and lots of young women and others. And I do think we should point to what the British royal family has done with Prince Andrew. Without absolute irrefutable evidence, but really strong evidence, circumstantial evidence, they've clearly shunned him. And you're not seeing that in the United States. If we get access to the photos and videos that we know were seized in the raids on Jeffrey Epstein's multiple homes, and they show Trump in compromising positions, I don't see how he could possibly survive that. If he can, America is a much more soulless and immoral place than I want to imagine. Oh, I think he could be forced out. I think you'd see a movement to force him out. You need you need a majority in the House to impeach, and the Democrats by 2027 are highly likely to have the majority. Then you need 2/3 of the senators. And remember, he was impeached twice. The second one, 57 votes against him, but that's not the 70 that you need, or you need 2/3. So 67 votes of the 100 senators. But I think you could pick up those other votes, because who's going to vote to support a pedophile in the White House? I mean, think about that. I'm going to go home and run for re-election, and hey, yes, I voted to keep a child rapist in the White House. That's why I don't believe he can survive that. Everything else you can justify, argue away, say it's politics, do all sorts of things. You can't do that with irrefutable evidence of rape. And by the way, why aren't we just believing the women, or at least why aren't we having them being testifying about this? Well, because that's the long history of women, that we don't listen to women, we don't believe them, we think they make false answers. We literally have a Republican theme going on in America right now that I've gotten, at least a dozen various social media notifications about in the last week, that Kamala Harris slept her way to the vice presidency. No, she won every election she ran in until she ran against Trump, and she came awfully close there. One of the closest elections in American history, even though Donald keeps claiming it was a landslide. So, there's deeply embedded cultural assumptions that are helping Trump. That's why irrefutable evidence, he can't overcome that.
And of course, that's if that irrefutable evidence exists.
Right. And he's clearly, the Justice Department is not going to release it. Pam Bondi, who was the Attorney General of Florida when a lot of the Epstein crimes took place, and who is utterly corrupt, that thoroughly documented. I've written about her corruption for years. Pam Bondi controls the Justice Department. And while she said, I have the list of clients on my desk, now she says, no, there was no list. There was no list. I mean, these people who get close to Trump, they know that their continued position of power depends on total and complete loyalty to Donald. And what I would warn people about who do that is, if we succeed in getting back our democracy in the United States, if you're a military officer who did illegal things like the murders of the 11 people on the boat off the waters of Venezuela as it was turning away, if you are a government official who destroyed evidence or lied in congressional testimony, you better get some very good lawyers, because you're likely to be prosecuted, and you should be prosecuted.
I wanted to move on quickly just to Charlie Kirk, who was killed last night in a shooting in Utah. What was your reaction to the scenes that we saw unfold last night?
Much as I find Charlie Kirk's rhetoric odious, I absolutely will defend his right. And the assassination of Charlie Kirk is an absolutely wrong, immoral act that's indefensible. I hope the police, who've made 2 false detentions so far, find, and I expect they will eventually find, the actual shooter, and that person's brought to justice. But let's not forget that a couple of months ago, a Trumper assassinated one of the highest state legislative leaders in Minnesota, who was a Democrat, and the spouse of that person, and attempted to, they survived the shootings, 2 other leading Democrats in the state. That we've had a number of shootings of both children and people who are perceived to have been Democrats, or for having skin color that isn't European white like you and me. Donald Trump didn't say anything about those. Pam Bondi didn't speak out about those. They're politicizing this for their benefit. People who have some schadenfreude about Charlie Kirk's death, because Charlie Kirk said repeatedly, having some gun deaths every year is the price we have to pay for the Second Amendment and our right to bear arms, our God-given right to bear arms. This is fetishism. It is venerating an object above human life. To anyone who's an actual Christian, and to be clear, I'm not a believer, but I've deeply studied religion, and I've actually lectured at the Harvard and Colgate Divinity Schools a number of times, as well as other schools on moral philosophy. This is wrong. You do not venerate objects over human life. The price we should be paying for a Second Amendment is 0 lives, which means we need to have a well-regulated Second Amendment, as the Constitution states, well-regulated. Similarly, we have women who are dying or rendered unable to have children because of these laws that say you can't have an abortion unless you're about to die. And as someone who had to make that decision on behalf of my first wife when the birth of one of our 6 children went very badly, that's your decision to make, primarily the woman. If she couldn't make it because she was all drugged up, mine. It's not the government's decision to make about these things. One of the Florida Republicans who sponsored its onerous, draconian no abortions law, except when you're at death's doorstep, got an ectopic pregnancy. The resolution of an ectopic pregnancy is an abortion. And if you don't get one, you may well die, very high likelihood you will die, and you may well never be able to have children again. And she picked up the phone and called Governor DeSantis, a Republican, to say, well, please make an exception for me. That's the kind of sort of thinking here. And the underlying problem is a moral problem of people who do not respect the sanctity of human life, who venerate objects and abstract ideas over human life, human health, human safety, and welfare. We have an administration in the US that has taken food away from hungry people, and we have a lot of hunger in the United States. We didn't used to, but we do now, who have taken away medical care from the latest estimates around 17 million Americans, so 5% of the population. We have an administration that grabs people off the street, and there are videos of people saying, I'm an American citizen, and you can hear the masked ICE agents saying, we don't care. And we know that they, in fact, have removed from the country a number of American citizens and refuse to acknowledge these errors and correct them and say, oh, we can't do anything. We can't do anything, which is utter nonsense. So we have a serious moral problem in the U.S. I've been writing about it for roughly, certainly the last 30 years, and to some degree, I suppose, my entire career back to the late 1960s. But we have a serious moral breakdown at the top. And a lot of that is driven by people who call themselves Christians, but whose stated positions in the world have nothing to do with the message of the New Testament, nothing whatsoever. And you can't persuade them otherwise because they've never read the book they claim to follow. So real serious, Morgan, underlying problems in this country driven by what the Catholic Church calls the 7 deadly sins, particularly greed.
You mentioned Ukraine earlier, and it feels like this week there's been 2 big blows to Trump's big diplomatic master plan: Russia's incursion into Poland, a NATO member, and then Israel's attack on Doha. What do you think that the mood music is right now in the White House and the State Department?
Well, Donald Trump is signaling that might makes right. And people like Vladimir Putin, President Xi, who wants to create larger China and hold down India to the extent that he can by propping up Pakistan, and other dictators get the message. You're not going to be publicly scolded. You're not going to be seriously sanctioned in any way. In the case of Ukraine, Joe Biden made a major, major mistake in the beginning. In the fall of 21, he released, very unusual thing to do, he released actual intelligence files showing that we knew the Russians were getting ready to invade Ukraine. And I believe instead of his incremental approach of giving a little more help, a little more help, a little more help to Ukraine, he should have said, you set one foot in Ukraine and you will be met with all the weaponry we can get to Ukraine between now and the date of your invasion. We will provide them with the very best artillery, HIMARS, intelligence, drones. We will start training today Ukrainian fighters to fly the very best jets. We will knock down your airborne surveillance planes. You will not occupy 1 inch of that sovereign country. We wouldn't be here today if he had done that, and we wouldn't be in World War III because you don't have to have a single American troop involved to do that. Likewise, the Europeans, who put more money into defending Ukraine than the United States, and by Europeans, I'm including the UK, even though it's left the European Union. They should have taken a much tougher position. Similarly, in Israel, what Hamas did on October 7th is absolutely indefensible and monstrous, even knowing all the history, the Nakba, et cetera. But the response has been totally disproportionate. One of the elements taught morally in the Old Testament, even in Hammurabi's code, about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that's not arguing for violence. It's you knocked my eye out, I don't get to kill your whole family. Proportionality is important, and we've lost sight of that. And what's going on in Gaza may or may not meet the technical world law definition of a genocide, it's clearly an atrocity and indefensible. And it turns out that Joe Biden never said anything to Netanyahu to stop this or else. Unfortunately, when Kamala Harris was running, because she had to be loyal as the vice president, she hinted that her policy would be different, but she never said what it was. I wish she had gone to Joe Biden and said, hey, look, I have to announce that if I'm elected, that I'm going to stop Netanyahu's attack on the people in Gaza. And it would have been unprecedented in American political history, but it might have gotten her enough more votes, the 1.5 million votes she needed to get over the finish line. I'm sure we've already seen that the largest Muslim population in the U.S. is in suburban Detroit in Michigan. And many people voted for Trump because they thought he would end, they believed him when he said, oh, I'll end this right away. And there's a lot of buyer's remorse among those voters who, frankly, were naive. I think Trump was going to do it. Donald has sold the public on this idea that he has, not all the public, but enough to be president, that he has these magical powers. He's a great negotiator. I have negotiated with Donald Trump as far back as 1988, the year that I wrote about him becoming president someday. And he's a terrible negotiator. And if you doubt me, when Tony Schwartz was hired to write The Art of the Deal, the book that made Trump well known, Trump said, well, how much do you want? Now, normally at that time, a writer for a book like that would have gotten, given Tony's reputation, maybe $50,000 and a bonus for every week of $1,000 if you made the New York Times bestseller list. Tony said half the royalties, and Trump said, okay. And as a result, now Tony Schwartz is a very wealthy man, even though he has been giving away the royalties since Trump became president in 2017. He's just a terrible, it's all con. It's all a made up story. And Trump gets away with this because, and this was a series of best-selling books I wrote in America earlier in this century. Americans today, the 90% of Americans today are worse off than they were in 1973. And if it weren't for all these policies that I exposed in Perfectly Legal, Free Lunch, and the fine print that silently take money from you and redistribute it to people in the top 10th of 1%, somewhat to the top 10%, but mostly the top 1 in 1,000 families, in ways are not obvious. I mean, it took me years of tedious reading of documents and saying, what does this language mean, to understand these things, enough that I became a professor of law, even though I'm not a lawyer. $80 trillion has been transferred to the top. Through the year 2018, it was $50 trillion, according to the estimate done at that time. In 2018, if we had kept the policies that were in place in 1973, 90% of Americans' average income would have been 2/3 higher. So if you're making $100,000, you would have made $167,000. Well, a lot of the social pathologies, a lot of the fear, economic fear, the bankruptcies would have gone away. And we'd be vastly more prosperous because, as Adam Smith taught over 250 years ago almost, economies are circulation systems, just like the blood in your body. And if the outflow through your arteries isn't matched by the inflow from your veins, it starts to pool somewhere and eventually rots. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this huge pooling of money at the top that's way beyond anybody's capacity to even gamble away the money. I mean, Elon Musk and Larry Ellison, the two richest men in the world, they can't even gamble away the amount of money that they have. And there's no utility to this whatsoever. And our rules and laws no longer recognize that. We're really good at creating wealth in the world. I mean, we really become good at it. Great insights by Adam Smith about how you create wealth. And I'm in favor of creating wealth. I'm a poster boy from going to poor to moderately rich. But the distribution of the fruits of the economy, completely unreasonable. You have a company with 33,000 workers and the CEO gets 48% of the stock options. I actually asked the CEO of a company that size once, how do you justify you got 48%? There's 33,000 workers. And he said, well, I motivated them. I. And my tape recording showed he said I 13 times. It's no longer about building wealth, which is what owning a business should be, unlike Donald Trump, who was a cash extractor who destroyed businesses. It's about how many commas are after your name. And we're, in my lifetime, probably going to see the first trillionaire. Something, by the way, I predicted in the New York Times in an article I wrote in the late 90s about how long it would take. We fundamentally have got core problems, but all of them go back to knowledge and morality. Those are the underlying problems. Those are the problems that are always there. If somebody thinks if Donald Trump is out of office and replaced by somebody who's a rational adult, that's not the end here. That's just the beginning of a new phase where we have to go back and start fixing the structural problems we have in our society. And societies make mistakes. I mean, I would argue that Brexit was an enormous mistake, and we're seeing that people in the United Kingdom are worse off economically. They're not keeping up with the growth that's going on in the EU. It's a policy mistake. You have to live with your mistakes. That's the point of democracy. We will control our future. We will decide, not some king or dictator, but then you have to live with your choices.